Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. My name is Sebastian Moore.
And I'm Hilary.salt, the Deputy Leader of the SDP.
Oof, we've had a very stressful start to the recording today. But we're ready. We're here and we're ready to go. Are you ready, Hilary?
I am. This is episode 10. Did you think we would ever get into double digits?
I did. I think we'll get into triple digits.
Superb. Great.
I'm optimistic. Yeah, episode 10. That's quite something, isn't it? It's a special episode. What are we going to talk about today? So you wanted to talk about the backlog of court cases?
I do.
I would like to discuss a new railway line that came into being this weekend.
Exciting.
And we'll be joined by Amanda Hunter, and she is going to bring us solutions for social care.
Correct.
So lots to discuss. We'll even have a special guest for Culture Club.
Correct.
So that's all to look forward to. So let's get going. Who would like to start?
Shall I go first?
Go for it. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about criminal justice and the big backlog in trials, the Crown Court trials. So there is a massive underinvestment, a huge backlog of cases. If you have a case now, it'll be listed probably for 2027. So in other words, you're waiting 2 years before your case even comes to court.
And this is Crown Court, isn't it?
This is Crown Court, so juries, all those kind of things that you think about when you think about
for the more serious crimes.
Criminal crimes, yes. Yeah. So what's it caused by? There are some differing views. There was a National Audit Office report. I really like the National Audit Office website. It's really good, a lot of good material on there.
That's really geeky.
It is quite geeky, yeah. But they reported in May this year that the shortages were caused by a shortage of legal professionals working in criminal law, high rates of ineffective trials, an increase in complex cases such as adult rape, cases delayed by COVID-19, so that's still clearly hanging over the court system, and the criminal defence barristers' industrial action that took place a little while ago. So they pointed to all those things. Obviously, that's kind of 6 months ago now. Other people have pointed to other problems. One is, and this is a bit baffling to me, so the Ministry of Justice sets a cap on the number of days that Crown Courts are allowed to sit. And the cap they've set for this year is 105,000, which is fewer than last year, even though there's clearly still a big backlog to go at. Now, as far as I can understand, they see that as a way of saving money. But I mean, if you think about it, those cases don't go away. So all you're doing is kind of putting off money. Now, my guess is, as a layperson, that if you put off a trial for longer, it costs you more in the long run, because you're paying somebody to pick up the papers again when they've put them down 4 times already. So getting things, one touch approach to admin is something that I think we all strive for. You don't want to keep coming back to something. And if you delay things, I'm sure you increase costs. There's other potential causes that other people have referred to. So the lack of legal aid in lots of cases. Low levels of fees for criminal work. So as I understand it, it's not just a free market in criminal work. There are ways in which courts intervene in terms of setting fees. And then there's some kind of really prosaic things like the poor upkeep of courtrooms. So, a hearing might be cancelled because the roof's leaking, that kind of thing. And staffing levels as well in courts. So there's obviously lots and lots of different reasons for this. But I think, they all kind of pale into insignificance behind, what it means, because it is really important. Do you know the phrase, justice delayed is justice denied? Mm-hmm. Do you know who that is? Well, I was confident it was Gladstone, and actually Gladstone is one of the people it is attributed to, but apparently there's a bit of an argument about other people might have said it before him. The actual principle behind that quite nice way of saying it is a very old one. Effectively, it's in Magna Carta, it's in the Bible. So, the need for swift justice, I think, is really well recognised.
What happens to the people that are awaiting court cases?
So many of them will be on remand, and remand, as I understand it, is in itself a really tricky problem, because people who are held on remand are often held in those very old jails that perhaps when you imagine a jail, this is what you imagine. So those old Victorian prisons, they're often locked up for 22 hours a day in cells that were designed for one, but with multiple occupants.
And this is presumably if they were denied bail.
Yes, and remember, we're talking about serious cases here, so many of them will be denied bail. If you're placed in a remand prison, you've had no preparation for it. So you're worried about how you look after your family, how you pay the mortgage. And so, people who are in that position have got a really tricky situation to deal with, really. So let me give you your options. Let's say you're held on remand. You've been accused of a serious offence. And let's say for the moment that you are innocent. So I've heard this described in terms of some of the people who were caught up in the riots, not the people who actually took part in the riots, but perhaps were filming or were passing by and watching what was going on. So you're accused of rioting, you're held in jail, and your choice is you plead guilty, you'll get a discount on your sentence for pleading guilty. At the moment we've got this, you only serve 40% of your time because they're trying to clear the prisons. So taking all that into account, plead guilty, you'll be out by Christmas. That's option 1. Option 2 is go to trial. You might be on remand for a year. Read some cases where people have been on remand for 5 years. And then if you're found innocent, you've still lost your job. You've got no compensation. You have no help on release, like a resettlement grant or anything like that. And if you're found guilty, whilst your remand time is deducted from your sentence, that might mean that, again, you're released immediately, again, with no help. So, I can understand people in that situation thinking, well, do you know what, I'll just plead guilty. And that, when we think about doing justice, we think about doing justice largely in terms of punishing the guilty, don't we? But justice also means making sure that innocent people aren't punished. And it does seem to be that that's the case that we're seeing now, that is what's happening. Going back to the National Audit Office, they said that one of the other problems with the big delay on getting to court is that it kind of exacerbates the impact on victims and on witnesses. It increases the chance of cases collapsing. Longer delays mean that people might actually give up. So victims or people who claim to be victims may well just give up and say, I'm not pursuing the case anymore. Their recollection of what happened might change, so you have perhaps less of a chance of being able to convict somebody. And of course, everybody's mental well-being, the people accused and those accusers are all, really stuck in a kind of limbo for so long. And none of this feels like justice to me. So Adrian Usher, who's the Prisons and Probation Ombudsman, was saying that what they're seeing is quite a lot of people changing their plea from innocent to guilty. So you can actually see it in real life in terms of it affecting real people's actual approach to their cases. I do want to mention that I've done a lot of reading on this in The Guardian. I'm not a great reader of The Guardian. That's not one of my newspapers, as it were. But they're really good on this. They've had a Courts in Crisis series. And if people are interested, I would recommend that. It is really good, and lots of human stories in there. But I can see you looking at me, Sebastian, saying, why is this in the news, aren't you? Is that what you're thinking?
I had a different question,
okay.
but go on, you can answer your own question.
Yeah. So the reason it's in the news is that on the 12th of December, the Ministry of Justice launched a review led by Sir Brian Levison to look into the prospect of creating new intermediate courts which would let judges try defendants who'd normally be tried in a jury trial. So in other words, this is being the big backlog in jury trials is being used as a way to say, oh, we don't really need jury trials, do we? Let's have this kind of intermediate alternative so that we can get through cases. And Lord Thomas, who's the former Lord Chief Justice, but presumably in the Lords now, was very vociferous in saying that government should consider scrapping juries to tackle the backlog. And, this is why I think it's really important, because undermining that key fundamental principle, the right to be tried by a jury of your peers, is really, to me, really a massive danger. the involvement of a group of randomly selected ordinary people in judging you is a key part, I think, of our British freedoms.
It reminds me somewhat of the prison crisis, which is very much linked to this, in that one solution they come up with is, we'll just release a load of prisoners. And you think, okay, yeah, if a problem is the prison population, that is one solution, but it's not the right solution because it undermines the whole point of having prisons in the first place. And it's the same with this. You can just do away with juries, but there's a reason we have juries for these serious cases.
Exactly that. And I don't think you have to go kind of full Hitchens. Peter Hitchens said in the Mail, this is the headline: if rape cases are to be heard without juries, how long before we scrap them altogether, just like Hitler and the Bolsheviks did? So I'm not quite saying that, but I do think that it's a dangerous attack on our liberties and our freedoms to say that jury trials should be scrapped. And the other thing I think is really important about juries is that it's a key part of our own involvement in a democratic society when we acting on juries. So I'm really worried about this whole development.
Well, we've talked in previous podcast episodes about the problems with policing or the problems with the NHS, and I've said that it just feels like kind of every public sector seems to be crumbling, and the solutions seem to be these weird sort of sticking plasters. So you just put the patch over it and say, oh yeah, well, we'll just do away with juries for certain cases, and it just feels like every aspect of the public sector seems to be crumbling. Do you have, obviously there'll be those that say we just need to fund it properly, but you can always throw more money at these things. Do you have any ideas of ways that we could go about improving the courts?
Well, I think there are some very basic things. So, for example, you can fix leaking roofs in courthouses, can't you? So looking at the infrastructure and making sure that we have proper infrastructure to support the court system, I think, is a good first start. Making sure that those are staffed in an efficient but reliable way. I don't know much about the whole court system and how the civil service supports that, but it feels that should be ripe for a review to make sure that is being done in the most appropriate way, and just making sure that we all understand the importance of these kind of ancient freedoms and don't allow them to be rode roughshod over, I think is a key issue. So hopefully that's of interest. You wanted to talk about something else that's not been working but might be working a little bit better, perhaps?
Yeah, I actually think it's quite nicely tied to what you've just been talking about. So, can I tell you what I did at the weekend?
You can.
I went to the least visited train station in the country. Do you know where it is?
I have no idea.
It's in Greater Manchester.
Is it?
Yeah. So
is it least visited because there were no trains?
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. So I was shocked to find this out because I expected it to be somewhere in like the Scottish Highlands or something.
Dorset.
Or Dorset. But it's in Greater Manchester. It's a station called Denton.
Oh, I know Denton. Yes. Yeah.
So it's very near to Reddish and Gorton, and the line is Stalybridge to Stockport. Now, this was a line that would have been at risk of being axed under the beaching cuts.
Wow, back to the beaching cuts.
Oh, we're going to talk about beaching a lot today. So, Dr. Richard Beeching, obviously he came up, he was the chair of the British Railways, and he came up with this report suggesting that we should cut a lot of lines across the country because of inefficiency amongst the rail sector.
And this is a long time ago, isn't it?
This is in the 60s, yeah. So we actually did 2 reports in the early 60s. Now, what some lines do nowadays, because of this, is they run a service maybe once a week to stop it from being at risk of being cut. And this is what happened on the Stalybridge to Stockport line. So there is a train that goes once a week on a Saturday morning at 8:30 in the morning, from Stalybridge to Stockport, and Denton is on that line, and last year it only had 54 passengers for the whole year.
Wow.
And
so just over 1 a week.
And this year that number will have increased by 3 because me and 2 friends went down there, and it was a wonderful experience. I loved it It's great. I'm a huge fan of trains, so I just really love going down to the station. It's small but lovely. There's from fresh plants, courtesy of friends of Denton Station.
So it maybe has more friends than travellers.
Exactly. There's a petition to keep it open, and I thought they should just all ride it every week.
Yes.
That would increase the passenger numbers tenfold. So anyway, this links quite nicely to the story at the weekend that the very next day, Sunday morning, there was a train from Newcastle to Ashington. Ashington is a town just north of Newcastle in Northumberland. And this is a line that was axed under the Beeching cuts, and it's actually come back. So on Sunday morning, the first train ran from there. And it's been a project that's long in the works, but it's 18 miles, the train line, and it takes about 35 minutes. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I think this gives us a good indication of the difficulties of certain infrastructure projects that we have, especially when it comes to rail. So the budget for this line was £160 million, and it was supposed to be finished in spring 2023. And it actually ended up costing £298.5 million, and it was finished just this month, December 2024. And you might say, it's great to have an infrastructure project like this actually come through, but this was a line that was already there. We didn't even have to build any track. So they've done is some upgrades to the tracks, and they've built a few new stations. I'm a big fan of the fact that this is happening, because I think it's great for towns like Blythe. Is it pronounced Blythe?
Yes.
Blythe is it's just been cut off since the line was axed. So there's currently only 2 stations that have opened on that line, and there's due to be 4 more opening, but they've been delayed and pushed back further to potentially the latter part of 2025. But this will bring a lot of people that live in these towns that were cut off and had to drive or get buses into Newcastle. It'll give them the chance to travel on the train into Newcastle.
And I'm assuming there's more than one train a week?
There's a service every half an hour.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, and the prices have been capped, I believe, at £3 as well for a journey, which I think is great. And some will say it'll take something like 7 million passengers over 20 years just to pay for this project. But I think the thing that people often miss when we talk about the pure numbers of certain rail projects, for example, is that there is a huge social benefit to this that is not being accounted for. The fact that people are able now to travel in quite easily, it'll allow business in these parts of the country that have been, forgotten about, really. So I'm a huge fan of this.
So Ashington, I think, is famous as the birthplace of Jackie and Bobby Charlton.
Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
There you go. So I wanted to just move this on to talk about a little bit more about infrastructure more widely. So one of the problems why we in the UK really struggle to build things, and we talked about HS2, the fact that they're building a new city in Bhutan, but we can't just do a simple railway project, is because the costs are just huge in the UK. And I'll give you just some numbers really quickly. So this is all per mile of how much it costs to build these projects. So trams in France, there was one in Besançon for £29 million per mile. In Orléans for £60 million per mile. The cheapest we've had in the UK was a stretch in Nottingham, which was £66 million per mile. And in Manchester, that was £252 million per mile for the tram, which you used to get into today, right?
I did, yes. I came on the tram today, yes, yeah. Is part of that the land value? Because, you've got to buy... Well, I assume they already own the land, do they? I don't...
Yeah, I mean,
understand that.
That'll be a factor, I suppose. I'll give you a couple more numbers. I'll run through the lot, then we can sort of talk about maybe some of the reasons why. Metro lines, so I call them metro just because I'm used to living in Europe.
Because you're very continental.
Yeah, underground. So the Elizabeth line, which was by all accounts a huge success. I know that there'll be some criticisms of it, but it's a brilliant infrastructure project.
Yes, I've been on it.
That cost £1.4 billion per mile. And you might say, well, that's an underground project, so there's lots of tunnelling involved. An underground project in Madrid, a new line of the Madrid metro, costs £68 million per mile. So we're not just talking a little bit of difference. This is huge differences. Tunnels, the Lower Thames crossing, £700 million per mile. There was a tunnel in Norway, which is the longest road tunnel in the world, £9 million per mile. So these numbers, the differences are just absolute massive. And my favourite example, this is the last one I promise, is the A14, Cambridge to Huntington. So this is just a road. That cost £1.6 billion for a 21-mile stretch of road, whereas the Ryfast and Eganes tunnel, which I'm pronouncing badly, but in Norway, which goes underneath the sea and through solid rock, costs £700 million for 14 miles. So we've got a huge problem with the costs of these projects in the UK. And one reason for that is every time we do one of these projects, we have to assemble all of the people and all of the equipment from scratch. You know, I think it would be a great idea to have an organisation which is dedicated to infrastructure improvement. And these could be for projects like HS2, for the new lines that they're looking at improving the northern stretch. And you could use that team and you could send them out on other projects when there's not a railway project, because there is a lot of overlap in these infrastructure projects. So I think that we have to do something like that. And it's, I think, the case in the UK, and this is kind of where we're at when we're talking about the court cases as well, the court backlog, is that we often sort of have these weird compromises and we paper over problems rather than putting in a big amount of investment which will pay off in the long run.
The other things that you've not mentioned so far are kind of regulation. So things like environmental effect of any new infrastructure, the requirements on things like, I don't want to say health and safety, because I'm not one of those people who thinks that health and safety has gone mad. I actually think it's really good that people don't die at work anymore as in the numbers that they used to. But there are a lot of regulatory requirements. Is it time for a bit of a bonfire of those?
I think it's absolutely necessary that we look at regulations and we improve and maybe get rid of certain regulations. Now, this is an area which I'm not an expert in, so I'm not going to pretend to know the solutions. But it does seem like there's a massive amount of red tape just to do a simple project. And I think it could easily be improved. And the reason for that is that you look at other countries that are doing it. And these aren't, developing countries somewhere across the other side of the world where they don't have human rights and so on. These are Western European countries. Norway is a world leader in this sort of thing. Why aren't we looking at them and saying, okay, how are they doing it? I think, definitely we need to get rid of some of the regulations.
Anything else that you can put your finger on as being part of the reason for the really big differences in costs?
Not something I can think of at the moment. No, do you have anything else?
I wondered about labour practices and whether it's that we use too many people to do we not use enough? Have we not invested enough in things like tunnelling equipment and engineering equipment so that we're still relying on men with shovels, as it were?
Yes, I think you're right to an extent. There's also an element of mission creep. You ever heard of mission creep?
Yes, yeah.
So in huge projects like these, where they go on for a long, long time, we have a very short-term political system where a new government comes in and says, we're going to do away with this. We didn't like what the last ones did. And even just with a government that's still conservative, with Rishi Sunak, even when Rishi Sunak decided to scrap parts of the HS2, that was under a conservative government originally, but he comes in as a new leader and says, we need to do something different. So there's not this long-term planning. And with mission creep, what happens is when there's some hurdles throughout the project, they say, why don't we just start doing this? Why don't we start doing something else? And I think they lose sight of the end goal. I'll give you an example for this, is that Ashington Station, so the end of this line, the Northumberland line, it didn't really need to be rebuilt. But they decided to rebuild it, which took a lot more money, took a lot longer. The station was there anyway. And this line that I'm talking about, it was usable because freight was running along this line the whole time, right? Which is a perfect example that it shouldn't require a huge amount of planning and changes. And I'll just finish by saying that I'm a huge fan of rail. I think a lot of people would choose to travel by train if it was an option for them. I know this from friends and family that just don't have that chance. And when they do travel by train, they say, it's such a pain because you can't get a seat and so on. So there's so much we can do. And I'm very fortunate to have travelled in many different countries with good railway networks, with bad railway networks. And if done properly, it can be such a lovely way to travel, and it can reduce the stress on the roads. The traffic in Manchester is awful. If we can improve railways, the brilliant thing about a train is if you need to put more people on it, you can just add another carriage.
Yeah, and it'd be great to have more freight on our trains as well as people, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So big fans of investment in the rail infrastructure. Well done to the people of Newcastle and Ashington.
Exactly. And don't go and take a train from Denton, because I want that to remain the least visited station. So I've got a claim to fame.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Sebastian.
In Bring Me Solutions this week, we're joined by Amanda Hunter, who is the co-chair for Families Against Involuntary Medical Euthanasia, the co-founder of Unlock Care Homes, and the chair of social care campaigns at the Together Declaration. Hello, Amanda.
Hello.
That's a long title.
Thank you for having me on.
Did I get it right?
No.
Oh, come on.
So I'm co-founder of the Families Against, not chair.
Well, I apologise.
So you're a busy lady.
Yes.
We heard you speak, Amanda, at the SDP conference on care, and you spoke so knowledgeably and so forcefully and so brilliantly that we felt that we needed to invite you onto the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
As you know, this segment is called Bring Me Solutions. So what that kind of requires us to do is lay out the problem of what we're bringing solutions for. So are you able to sort of articulate a bit of the problem around social care?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to understand that social care is not referring, when we talk about social care, we're not just talking about people in their twilight years who are, struggling with the conditions of old age. Over half of adult social care is for working age adults. So that's the kind of misconception that we kind of need to knock on the head if we're to understand what's going on here. So there are lots of problems with social care. The care sector is incredibly complex and incredibly fragmented. There are anything between, whether you believe government figures or other figures, between 11,000 and 17,000 care homes. That's a huge difference. So there's obviously very little clear data, really, of what capacity is, but they say that capacity is around 4,580,000 beds.
How do they not know how many care homes
Well,
there are?
I find it because on the government website, if you looked at the government website on care home statistics, it says there are just under 11,000 registered care homes. But if you look on other data, it's saying up to 17,000. So it's very difficult to know what to take as the takeaway figure, if you like. I mean, I contacted the King's Fund. And I think they're saying around 15,500 places. But again, there doesn't seem to be a definitive number. But what we do know is that in order to meet current needs, there are not enough care home places, or rather there is still some capacity in the system, but it depends where you are. So in London, for example, they're operating at almost full capacity, whereas in other parts of the country maybe that's not the case. So it's a bit of a postcode lottery, really, and that also applies to how much councils will fund for care. So people who are self-funders can be spending up to 60,000 a year for a care home place and 73,000 for nursing care, whereas local authorities will only pay between 600 and 800, I think, for most care. Some special people with physical disabilities as well get extra funding. But, the amount that local authorities have to spend on care is about, a half to 2/3 of what it actually costs. And so that's a big problem.
When I was young, Amanda, councils provided care homes. So councils didn't, give you money to buy care for somebody else. They actually provided that service. Do any councils provide that service now? And if not, why not?
Right. So I think what you need to look at is the fact that the political decisions in the 90s meant that care was being taken out of local authority, as local authorities were no longer going to be providing the service. They were kind of like brokers, if you like, for the service. So they would be involved in commissioning care, but not actually providing it. So in I think it was in 1992, the majority of care homes were run by by local government. But now, according to a report by the Oxford Department of Social Policy and Intervention at Oxford University, which released a report, a longitudinal study in October, and that was showing that around 96% now of care home beds or nursing home beds are actually provided by the private sector. So in answer to your question, I did contact the King's Fund. They weren't able to get back to me, but I did a bit of research. And from what I can understand, about 84, but this isn't up to date, this was last year. So 84%, it was saying, were in the hands of private enterprise. 16% were either voluntary sector, so charities such as, Methodist Housing Association, they have care homes and other, charity providers, but only 3% are now provided local authority, and I guess that kind of fits in with the 96% figure of the Oxford report. So very few councils are providing care, and this is the elephant in the room. And I think that no government of any political hue is going to be able to fix the care sector unless something is done about this, because if you look at the figures for the directors of adult social care, I think only 10% this year believe that they could meet the needs of those in their communities, and that compares to 35%, I think it was last year. So that's a huge drop, and it was already very low. So, and one of the directors of it was actually Children's Social Services last year said, we are looking down the barrel of a gun, and that. And the elephant in the room is profit. So if local authorities are having to pay for care, but their average budget is $800 a week, and it's actually costing $1,500, $600. You can see there's a huge gap there, and also a lot of people are not getting care places. People are languishing in hospital for weeks and months on end because there isn't capacity either within the care home sector where they live or for domiciliary care at home. And that leads to another question, which is, chronic understaffing within the sector. So I think there are about 100,000 vacancies in the sector at the moment, maybe slightly more than that. And, there are many reasons for that.
And I guess the rise in employers' national insurance rates will have a big impact on these organisations as well. That should make things worse, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, I contact the King's Fund to find out if there is any research. Obviously, it's quite early at the moment. So there are a number of articles that have been written, and those that are really going to be hit by this are the independent sector. So when I talk about the independent sector, I'm talking about individual care homes, or maybe a care home company that owns 2 care homes, not the big mega groups, the corporate groups that dominate the sector. There are 5 groups that dominate the sector. Bupa, Four Seasons, HC1, Barchester, and another one this name escapes me, but there are 5 main corporate providers, and they dominate the whole sector. And their fees are very high, and the quality of care is very, very low. So yes, it's going to have a huge impact. And if you think about the fact that, there are more care homes closing now than opening. I can give you the figure on that. If you just bear with me, I can give you the figure on that. Yes, declining profit margins and forced closures by the Care Quality Commission, which is rare, by the way, they rarely close homes, have led to a loss of over 14,000 care places last year alone. So if and care homes are closing, as I say, more rapidly than they are opening. So, and there's an emphasis on trying to bring care back to the home, and so more services provided in domiciliary care services, where care is commissioned from by local authorities, or NHS continuing health care, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But those services are commissioned so that people can stay at home as long as possible. But there will always be a need for care homes, because increasingly people are getting older. They may not have children. They may not have children locally who can look after them. I mean, people that I have been campaigning with have had to maybe travel up 250 miles up and down the country, maybe 3 times in the space of a week, because of accidents or whatever have happened at home, or problem breakdown in the care package, or so it's a huge problem.
I know that one of the things that you've said is an issue as well, is this, it's very confusing, but this interface between care and the NHS. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So most social care care is funded by local authorities, who have very, very tight budgets and very, very unrealistic budgets. However, some care is provided by the NHS under continuing health care. So if anyone is assessed as having a primary health need, then they should be eligible for CHC funding. But the reality is that far more people are turned down for this than are actually get that funding help. So and it's not for nothing that it's called the NHS's best kept secret, because most people don't know it's available. But proving that primary health need, and dementia is not included in that list, is fraught with problems. And so what happens is families, or the individuals themselves, are left struggling, trying to find who is responsible for funding the care. And social services will say, no, you've got primary health need, it needs to be NHS. And NHS will say, no, you don't have a primary health need, it's social care. And so the poor family, or the individual, is left, struggling to navigate a very, very complex system, and get the funding that they need. And even to get the funding, they have to go through an assessment. And, 250,000 adults are currently waiting for a needs assessment. And the families of almost 29, there were 29,000 older people who died last year waiting for the care they needed. There's a huge lack of capacity within the system. And what's happening is families are having to take up the brunt of this. So it's now estimated that we have around 9 million unpaid carers propping up the broken system. And many of them are having to give up work in order to do this. But at the same time, as the government and the state saying care begins at home, which is all very well, in order to take on that role, many have to give up work. The whole system needs a revolution, really. I mean, we've got to look at the level of assistance in the community. We've got to look at the benefit system. We've got to look at unpaid carers. We've got to look at the funding question. There have been there were the reforms that were supposed to come in last year, and they were put into the wrong grasp by by Sunak's government, and unfortunately, Labour have not decided to, go ahead with those reforms, and again themselves push them into the long grass. And so, this is what we have. We have constantly, governments telling us that they're going to sort out social care. Boris Johnson stood on the steps of Downing Street saying as much, that he was going to, fix social care for good, and all these empty promises. But once, they understand how much this is actually going to cost, those plans, those reforms are, thrown up the road for the next administration to tackle. And of course, we can't carry on like this. The system is now not only broken, it's in danger of imploding. And those who are most vulnerable, the elderly and the frail, are on the receiving end. And really, this needs to change.
Yeah, like you say, it seems like it's a thing that's not politically popular to engage in. And you said that Boris Johnson said he was going to fix it. Theresa May in 2017 had a plan for social care. But it seems that political parties are reluctant to deal with the problem head on. And you talked a little bit about looking at these certain areas of social care and seeing what we can do with that. Do you have any ideas for solutions for these things? Talking about unpaid carers, or the fact that there's not enough space, or the fact that there's a lack of staff?
Well, yes. But where do I begin? I think the first thing that we need to do is face the fact that profit, maximisation and care do not mix. You cannot make the kind of efficiencies that you make in other areas of the economy in social care and health. And so we need to have a very serious public conversation about this and how much we are willing to invest in health and social care. And if you actually look at the number one issue for people at the last election, I believe it was health, and social care, I think, was lower down. But that's also because people don't understand that the two are inextricably linked. And this is why we need to have an integrated system. And there have been some efforts to integrate care. We've got the integrated care boards, but this is not the answer. The answer is to actually have a department that is running health and social care in synergy. And there should not be this artificial division between the two. And this would also help families navigate the system, because there'd be one sector to deal with, not two. And so that's one of the things. I think profit is the main elephant in the room here. So where do we go from that? Do we go back to state-run care as we did in past decades? Do we go back to the old system? I don't think that's the answer. I think what we need to be doing is we need to be looking to running social care services from our communities. These will sometimes these will need to be properly funded and by the state, and for professionals to be working in these institutions. But we also need far more domiciliary care support to enable people to live at home for as long as possible. And although that's the movement within, government thinking really, is to try and bring more care close to home, the state can't have it both ways. If it wants families to be caring for people at home, and care at home is the best form of care, and it's the least stressful, really, if it's well supported. But the reality is it's not well supported. So there isn't the practical support, there isn't the financial support. So if we can sort that out, and bring, care closer to home, and not maybe in individuals' homes, but in community care homes that are run by volunteers and professionals working together, involving families, involving the local community. And if we think of, the call during the pandemic for volunteers, thousands and thousands and thousands of people put their name down to volunteer. There is a willingness within communities to get involved and to support those in need. But it was, even during during COVID period, it was very poorly organised. I was never called once, so I think we need to be, one of the things that I think we also need to be doing is to be encouraging people to care, so maybe if people are volunteering in the local community in care, they get vouchers, for example, towards their own care when the time comes. I think there are lots of ways that we can encourage people to get involved in care.
Yeah, I love some of the things you're saying, and I think this really articulates where we're coming from when we talk about being social democrats, and it's something we talk about, or try to, from every episode. And this, the things that you're raising now are very much in line with where we find ourselves on the political spectrum. I had just one last question, because I'm aware we should really wrap up. You talked a lot about trying to enable people to care for people at home as much as possible. Right, and I certainly know, and you've lived in Italy, as we were talking about before recording, and I have as well. And it does seem that there is a difference in culture, the way that they care for elderly folk and others. And I wonder, do you think there needs to be some sort of cultural shift in the UK?
Well, I think there does, but I also think we need to be realistic. I mean, if you look at Italy, I lived in Italy for 23 years. Families tend to live in the same area, whereas in Britain, you will often find that, the grandparents live in one town, the parents live in another town, and the grandchildren live in an even more distant town. We don't have that same sort of social cohesion that they have in the Mediterranean countries, and that's because people are work away from they leave their birthplace, and they go and work in other areas of the country where work is. So we have to be realistic that we can't necessarily copy that model, but I think there are ways that we can facilitate that where it is possible. And I think we also need to look at architecture. Our homes are tiny. They are not made for enabling people to look after their families in addition to their own. Their elderly relatives in addition to their own families. So I think we need to think about architecture as well, and how we move forward, because I think we need to be factoring this into new builds. Our population is getting older. We are living longer, although we are now the lowest life expectancy in Europe now, which is quite concerning. But we are living longer, and the burden on health and social care as our population ages is something that we need to be very, very mindful of. And I think comes back to the question of throwing the can down the road. We've got to stop throwing that can down the road. And can I just come in on one thing that is absolutely crucial about recruitment? This is one of the major problems in the sector. So wages are incredibly low, hours are long. And then, there's very, very poor morale within the care sector. 25% of those who in the care sector left their jobs last year. Turnover is around 34%. And we need to look at raising wages, and we also need to look at improving training, because training is dire. It often consists of going onto a computer and going through a series of questions. This is not proper training, and we need to make social care a career that people go into as a vocation, one where they get good training and they are well supported financially and in their working lives. And that includes shift work, because 12-hour shifts, that is not good for the people being cared for, and it's not good for those who are caring.
It feels like a sector that's crying out for national standards for pay, qualifications and terms and conditions, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It's the lowest paid sector, and people are desperately in need of care, and that's just going to that's going to increase. Our needs are going to increase, and we really need to be, as I say, stop throwing this can down the road. We need to grapple with this brings me to my final point, and it's, in order to have a functioning care and health system worthy of the name, we need a far more dynamic economy and far more productivity and economic growth. We've got to be realistic. Care costs money. And in order to provide that care, we need a far more dynamic economy. It's not the only reason care is in such a bad way. There are many reasons, as I've mentioned, not all of them, but some of them. And the other is poor care cultures. So I think, there are so many things that we need to look at, but it really needs a revolution, not only in the way it's organised, delivered, funded, but also, how people should be involved in their care, not something that is done to you, but something that you are involved in planning your care. And there's also the rights issue, there's the overreach of the state in people's lives. There is so much more I could talk about, but it's been great to be able to talk about those things. So thank you.
Fabulous, Amanda. That's really, really good. I'm sure you must have learnt a lot there, Sebastian.
Yeah, and you've filled me with far more confidence and optimism than any politician I've heard speaking about social care in the last 10 years. So thank you so much for coming on and bringing us some solutions.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In Culture Club this week, we've got a special guest purely for Culture Club. This is really exciting. So we're joined by Sarah Bartlett, who is an STP member based in Birmingham. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And you wanted to bring something to Culture Club to talk to us about.
That's right, yeah. So I've been reading a book called The Collapse of the Conservatives by Steve Rayson, which was published at the beginning of this month. And that makes it very current, surprisingly current, actually, because it looks at what it says it's going to look at. It looks at that vertiginous drop in popularity that the Conservatives have suffered since their heyday in 2019, 2020, and tries to sort of explain how that happens. The surprise is how recent it goes up to. So it covers the election. It covers the first weeks of the Labour government.
That's amazing, because
it's a really good account.
Because usually I find with political books is that they are quite quickly outdated. Politics moves fast, and there is quite a long process when you're trying to get a book published that it has to go off to the publishers and the editors and so on. So it's amazing that it's been published earlier this month, and yet it includes the fallout of the general election.
It absolutely does, yeah. A key idea in this book is trust. and what happens when trust disappears from political life. And I'm really forcibly reminded of that today with what's happened to the WASPy women, who were vociferously supported by the Labour Party right up until today, when apparently they're not going to get any compensation at all, which is the only real sort of meaningful support, isn't it really? Even though I've got my own reservations about that campaign, actually, and how maybe limited it was, still promises and pledges were made. Anyway, sort of back to the subject matter at hand. One of the things that I found most useful about this book is that it gave me a summary of, political development since 2014. Because, you find, don't you, that so much is going on at the moment. Things are changing so fast. It's really, really difficult to hold on to key details in your mind. And one of the things I'd completely forgotten about, even though it only happened this year, was the betting scandal. Just tackle it. I just completely forgotten about it. And yeah, that was a key moment in the election campaign where, the Tories weren't doing great, were they, as it happened? Labour had this strong narrative, which features prominently in the book, this narrative of broken Britain and, the Tories need to be punished. That narrative really sits at the centre of the book. It threads its way through. So it's just useful to look across this period, the extent to which the Conservatives really are responsible for their own downfall, and the extent to which there are sort of external conditions that are really sort of playing on them. But that trust and that lack of trust comes back again and again and really plays into that volatile political environment that we've got at the moment, and that could lead to anything. That's very much a live problem, and that could have real repercussions for political lives and our own personal lives in the very near future.
You said to us beforehand that it takes an analytical approach rather than a biographical one. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. If you want to read what was going on in the heads of the key players throughout this period, this is not the book for you. But on the other hand, if it wanted to do that, it probably wouldn't be able to be as current as it is, because it has taken this analytical approach. It hasn't, gone right up to about a few months ago. So it's not biographical. It's, it's not like looking at the main people's lives. It's taking a more statistical look. It's taking a more sort of, one step back, looking at the objective evidence. That's even more useful, actually, in his previous book, which was The Fall of the Red Wall, which is methodologically a bit more interesting in that he was seeking to sort of really reveal how exactly opposition to Labour had rippled out in the Red Wall, and he does that with focus groups and interviews to show how these seeding conversation gradually give people the confidence to say, oh, actually, I'm not supporting Labour anymore. So it's an interesting approach. It's not for everybody. If ultimately politics are about human beings, aren't they, really? So that, and we all want to dissect what's going on behind the scenes with the key players, what they're really thinking and what the conversations are like behind closed doors. And that's not what you get from this book. Instead, it's a much more straightforward and analytical account.
Did you feel you could trust the analysis in the book? Because one of the things that I think we all find a bit tricky is understanding how the polls have been so wrong recently, not just in our election, but in all the elections. So, even this time, the polls were way off what the actual result was.
I don't completely trust anything, really. We all owe it to ourselves in this period, which is so unpredictable and so unstructured, isn't it? we all owe it to ourselves to consult as wide a set of sources as possible. I'm the only person I know who's got a subscription to both The Guardian and The Telegraph. That tells me so much, especially about the omissions in coverage, what the Guardian isn't saying, what the Telegraph isn't saying. The Telegraph is a bit easier to read. This is a complete aside, but the Telegraph tend to be much more upfront about their own agendas, and it's easier to strip out their bias. The Guardian tends to do it by omission, in my experience of reading across those sources. So we've all got to do that. We've all got to consult a range of sources, or we're just not going to get through this period without a proper understanding of what's really going on.
You spoke about some of the reasons why the Conservative Party seemed to have this huge electoral wipeout this year in 2024. If you think back to the 14 years that they were in power, there were so many scandals over that time, especially towards the latter end. Do you think that we can attribute their demise to one of those scandals in particular, or do you think that simply the party and being in government had just run its course?
Well, I can only speak from my own point of view here. I think that the Conservatives continue to be like variants from sort of popular thinking, in that they're so libertarian, they're so free market, and Kemi Badenoch is every bit as much like that. So that's one thing that's sort of going on there. But I think that what this book really, really helped me to do, when you look back on that period that you've just sort of cited, is to split out how the Conservative really self-harmed in things like the betting scandal, and Partygate. Partygate's huge, of course, real pivotal moment. And the things to which they had no control over. So it's really incredibly useful in that regard. The other thing that I found really useful as an aside, which I think is probably the most important thing to sort of for me to take away from this book, is that actually more people voted for Labour in 2019 than did in 2024, and just really, really shows how broad and shallow Labour support is at the moment. And we're just really, really seeing that play out now, aren't we, really? So this is very much a book for the here and now, just couldn't be more current, and will really help people to really sort of crystallise their understanding of the present day.
And can it help us looking forward, Sarah? So I know you were at the SDP conference recently, and one of the points that was made from the podium by somebody else was that the vote that we really need to go after in the SDP is the non-voters, because actually they are the biggest slice of the electorate. Does it tell us anything about how we do that, how we try to move people away from not voting at all to voting for a proper alternative? I think no, in a way. It's not that kind of book. But I think that if we at least focus on the key problem, which is one of trust, and at least see what Labour are doing at the moment with their broken promises, is really going to create difficulties for us, whether we're in power in the future or not. In any future campaigning, it's just going to sort of deepen that cynicism, isn't it? And at least we're in a sort of a position of knowledge to strategise around that, I think.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned there about people feeling no love for the Labour Party nor the Conservatives, and the result in 2024 is the lowest vote share between the two major parties for a generation. And I think one of the reasons we do this podcast is because we recognise that there are a lot of people out there that do feel politically homeless, and hopefully some of the conversations like we're having with you today or with Amanda just before can resonate with people, and they think, oh yeah, maybe there is a chance of a different, an alternative to what we've currently got.
So thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us. Really good to have a different approach to Culture Club this week.
Thanks very much, and I hope it really does deserve to be read. So hopefully my review will prompt some people to go onto Amazon or wherever you get your books and get your own copy.
And that was The Collapse of the Conservatives by Steve Rayson. We'll put the recommendations for today in the description of this podcast as always, and along with our email addresses if you want to get in touch or ask us a question about anything. We won't be recording an episode next week because it's Christmas.
We are having a Christmas holiday next week, yes.
We are indeed. But we will be back in the first week of 2025 and we'll be dissecting the news stories that no doubt envelop over the next couple of weeks. So do join us then. Thank you to Sarah and Amanda for bringing some brilliant points to the podcast this week. And everybody have a lovely Christmas. See you in 2025.
And please share and recommend podcasts to all your friends. Merry Christmas, everybody.